right, welcome everybody to our first meeting of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Planning. We really appreciate the opportunity to get this started. There's been a lot of groundwork that's taken place at our agency and other agencies to make this all come to fruition. So we're very excited about it. I'm Brenda Bergeron. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, responsible for the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, DEMIS. And that's who is taking the lead on coordinating this effort. So again, welcome everybody. I'll turn it over to Ken and we can do quick introductions and then get ourselves started. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Just briefly, I wanted to thank Scott and his team from Dewberry for putting this meeting together. This is the first in a series of, I think, 3 or 4 meetings that we're going to have in a group session. But again, I'll keep it brief. Ken Dumas, the State Hazard Mitigation Officer in Connecticut. And then we'll go around to my right and we'll do quick introductions. George.
George Brandner, the Connecticut Insurance Department, and long-term recovery, working closely with the students.
All right, Jamie Kaplan, I'll be a subcontractor with Dewberry.
Hi everyone, my name is Jade Payne. I work at Dewberry and I'm the Deputy Project Manager for this effort and also the lead resilience plan.
Hi, I'm Jenny from Wells. I'm also at Dewberry and I'm a planner on this project.
We don't know what to do here on this side.
Hold down the porch, right?
Good afternoon, I'm Scott Shorkey with Dewberry. I'll be the project manager for the plan update. Third time, I believe. Third time it's in Dewberry. Once or twice, but it's a state plan.
My name's Sarah Met, state geologist at Deep. Ashley Benitez, Office of Climate Planning, Deep.
Doug Lowacki, I'm an EMPS here at DEMIS, but I worked with Scott as a state hazard mitigation officer 30 years ago, back on the things.
Thanks, Doug.
Sorry, Scott.
I don't have an intro that cool, but I'm Stephanie Testos. I'm new to DEMIS as of January, and I'm an EMPS, and I'm in the hazard mitigation unit. Nice to meet you.
I'm Danny Moyer. I am in the hazard mitigation unit here at DEMIS as a person management program specialist.
I'm Sarah Watson. I'm a senior environmental analyst in the Office of Climate Planning at DEP.
Emily Finch, supervisor of sustainability and resiliency at DOT.
Zach Jerome, Connecticut DOT. I work with Emily in sustainability.
All right. Is that everybody in the room?
Yes.
All right. For those who are not in the room, maybe if you could unmute yourself and just quickly list your name and the agency that you're with.
Hi, my name's Karen Michaels. I'm a Connecticut Deep in Land and Water Resources Division, the planning section.
Good afternoon. This is Jonathan Kinney. I'm the State Historic Preservation Officer with the SHPO in DECD.
Hello, everybody. Henry Patrick. I'm with DEMIS. I'm the Regional 5 Planner, which covers the northwest part of the state.
I'm Alfredo Herrera. I'm the Geographic Information Officer with the Office of Policy and Management.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joanna Wozniak Brown, the Climate Infrastructure Policy Coordinator, and it feels like a lifetime ago since the last update. So this is exciting to see everybody.
Hi, this is
Go ahead.
This is John Trzynski, Director of Resilience Planning at Circa in Yukon.
Hi, this is Bruce Wickson of Office of Policy and Management, Office of Responsible Growth.
Hi, Francesca Provenzano, Connecticut Department of Public Health.
Chuck Lee, DEEP, Dam Safety Program.
Eric Ronowitz, Connecticut DOT, Office of Environmental Planning.
Hi, I'm Hannah Rush. I work with Dewberry, and I'll be the plan development lead for this project, and I'm also a geospatial analyst.
You're on the right side of the table, Hannah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Gordon, and I'm a resilience planner with Dewberry, and I will be leading the hazard identification and risk assessment.
Nisha, did Nisha? introduce
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sorry about that. I'm here. I'm Nisha Patel. I'm with Connecticut Deep. I'm in the Water Planning and Management Division, and that includes wastewater treatment facilities, municipal wastewater. So I'm here sort of with that program in mind.
Thank you.
All right, is there anybody that we missed online that'd like to quickly introduce themselves?
Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Laughlin. I'm community planner with FEMA Region 1. Pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Welcome. And one more person in the room.
Yeah, Jeff Samancic, I'm with Connecticut Deep on Radiation Division and also do incident command for the agency. Thanks.
All right, Brenda or Ken, you want to say anything to get us started, or should we just jump right in?
No, I think Joanna said it very well. She said we're excited to be here, and it's so nice to see so many familiar faces and some new faces so that we can really dive into such an important area.
All right, thanks, everybody. We've done intros. I just wanted to spend a few minutes on this slide just to kind of explain who the teams are. Not going to go through the names, but the core planning team is Dennis and a few folks from Deep, and that's the team that kind of is working with us behind the scenes to help facilitate the process and keep things moving along. Everybody on this call and others who are invited represent the hazard mitigation planning team. So it has a broader distribution of folks from across different agencies. And then there will also be a stakeholder group, which will bring in folks like Eversource, hopefully, in CLP and United Illuminating and other stakeholders who are not a part of the actual hazard mitigation planning team. So I just wanted to kind of put those three groups into context. Go to the next slide. The agenda today, we're going to just give a quick overview of the planning process. Most of you, I think, have been through this before, so some of this may seem a little redundant, although there are some pretty significant changes this go around. We'll talk about the update of the hazard identification and risk assessment. We'll spend some time talking about the 2019 plan, what we like about it, what we don't like about it, and then we'll spend some time in a breakout groups by agencies or groups of agencies going through the strategies that were in the 2019 plan to kind of get a jump start on the disposition of those strategies to see where they're at, which ones have been completed, or et cetera. And then we'll wrap up by talking about the rest of the schedule and the rest of the process, which is quite compressed in this go around. So Jane is going to take us through the process. When Jade is doing that, I'm going to pass around some participant worksheets because in a couple of slides we're going to talk about. We're going to ask you to fill out some questions on these worksheets.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Jade Payne. I'll just be going through the overall plan process, just level set a little bit. So starting out, beginning, what is hazard mitigation? So it's going to be any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to human life, infrastructure, and the environment from hazards. And in this case, for this plan, we're focusing on natural hazards only. So we have a couple depictions on the screen showing some different types of mitigation. But just want to emphasize here that when we're speaking about mitigation, we're not talking about preparedness and response. We can have some of those actions in the plan if we need to, and it is something that goes hand in hand as a part of the entire process of preparing and mitigating natural hazards. But the main focus here is going to be hazard mitigation. All right, so just a little bit about what a hazard mitigation plan is. So it's something that identifies risks and solutions in a pre-disaster environment. So this is where we put in the work early on to help prevent any of the resource burdens that we would experience during and immediately after a natural hazard event. It's going to be something that supports decision making. So like I said, we're putting all this pre-work in to help kind of set us up for success in the future. So the decisions are already made and we already know what we need to accomplish and what projects we need to implement to better the state of Connecticut. And it's going to make the state as a whole more disaster resilient. It's going to help data sharing between different levels of government and academia. So it's through this process, the local hazard mitigation plans will inform the state plan. But then we're updating the state plan to also in turn inform the local plans when they go through their updates every 5 years or so. So the state plan is a way to help kind of set the tone and guide the local plans while also sharing information and data back and forth. And then most notably, it creates eligibility for pre and post disaster mitigation funds from FEMA. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I just want to highlight that it does create eligibility for public assistance. So there can be a lot on the line on making sure that the plan is up to date. And then it should be something that's incorporated into other planning mechanisms, not only the other local plans, but other types of state plans and programs as well. And so that's what a hazard mitigation plan is, a little bit about what it is not. So it's not a regulatory document. It's not creating new rules that we need to stick to or there's going to be consequences. It's not a binding commitment. So everything that goes into this hazard mitigation plan does not have to get done. So you can, while you want to be practical, you can be a little bit ambitious in what we're including in the plan, especially if it's something that you want to hopefully get funding for. Grant funding for specifically in the future. So a little overview of the planning process as a whole. So we're fairly early on. We're coordinating and collecting data. So we're going to be using data from the state. We're going to be taking a look at data that was used and incorporated into local hazard mitigation plans, other federally available data sets as well. And then after that, we're moving into the risk assessment. So we're going to be assessing the risks. We're going to be analyzing capabilities and really setting the tone for, or setting the stage and the foundation for developing the mitigation strategy, which relies on the capability assessment and the risk assessment to determine what kind of projects we're going to be focusing on, what kind of actions we're going to be including. And this is a good time to point out that we will be focusing on equity and climate change kind of to the next level during this plan. This is a requirement from FEMA, but it's also something that's important to the state. So we're happy to kind of take that up a notch. Then after the mitigation strategy, decide on implementation procedures. So how are we going to make sure that the mitigation strategy is implemented? How are we going to keep up with the plan? You know, ideally, it's not something that you just update every 5 years. It should be annual or even more often check-ins just to make sure that we are accomplishing what we set out to accomplish. And then the last step, reviewing and adopting the plan. So FEMA will review the plan, make sure that it's up to all meets regulations and their policy for what is required to be in the plan, and then get adopted and go into effect. So you saw on the last slide, there was some outreach that was happening throughout the process. So these are some of the things that we're going to be doing while we update the plan. So we're going to have a big focus on stakeholder engagement. FEMA is emphasizing that even more over the past couple of years. So we want to bring in all of our state partners like you all on the call today, but we're also going to bring in some representatives from COGS. We're going to bring in some folks from academia, utility companies. Going to be a a long list of stakeholders that we'll be reaching out to share information, but also collect and gather some data and information from them as well, so we can create a better buy-in for the plan. We'll have a project website that's set up. We'll have separate stakeholder public meetings. We'll have an online survey, at least one online survey, and then a draft plan review survey that we'll do online as well. This meeting and our other meetings will be recorded, so those will be available after the fact and online for those that may have missed the meeting. And we'll also be developing out a story map that will provide some information on what this process entails, and also share some preliminary findings from the risk assessment and some data that we're using there. So here we have an overview of the project milestones. So you can see we're at the kickoff meeting stage, doing a lot of data collection, getting the stakeholder risk list ready, as I mentioned before. So getting a lot of this preliminary work done before we jump into the biggest portion, which is the risk and case capability assessments. That will be kind of where we, as in Dewberry, as a team, kind of goes behind the scenes. We go away for a bit. We work on the risk assessment, work on the capability assessment. We reach out to others as needed to make sure that we have all the data necessary to accomplish this. But we will take a month or two to get the risk assessment and capability assessments underway, and then we'll reach back out when we have our initial findings to try and get some input and review there. And then after that, we will have a workshop where we'll go over the results more in depth, and we'll also start trying to finalize the mitigation goals and objectives that the state wants to include in the plan, as well as start developing out the activities, actions, projects that we want included in the mitigation strategy. And once we get all that settled, we will have our draft review, and then finally the final review that's done by FEMA. And then we also have some public or like stakeholder meetings throughout the process as well. And I know Scott touched on this a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to go a little bit more in depth so you can see the overview of what the overall participation expectations are. So the Dewberry team, we're really doing the heavy lifting. We're providing the technical support. We're facilitating the process. You know, the bulk of the work will be done by the Dewberry team. We also have the core planning team, which is made up of some folks from Demis and Deep, who are the key decision makers here and are also a part of the hazard mitigation planning team, which is everyone on the call. And the hazard mitigation planning team, or HMPT, will be helping to choose the actions, providing input and information and feedback, which is a critical part and will be very important. And then they'll also be asked, so you all will be asked to attend some of the meetings, which there will be 3 in total, including this one, as well as a couple kind of ad hoc agency meetings that will be held virtually, and those will be ad hoc or as needed, just to make sure that we gather the updates from the actions in the 2019 plan, as we have to provide FEMA with an update on the results of those actions. And then finally, the stakeholders, they'll be responding to surveys, they'll be looking at the story map and the online website, attending the stakeholder meetings. And we just have some examples of stakeholders there, like the FEMA Region 1, COGS, and then some other state and federal agencies as well. So just an overview here of some of the guiding regulations and documents that we will be relying on throughout this update. So we have the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, which is really the foundation of all of this, outlines the requirements and procedures to implement hazard mitigation planning. So to develop this hazard mitigation plan, and notably to receive several different types of assistance. So we have some listed there. You'll notice public assistance is listed, which is definitely a big one. And then we have several other hazard mitigation assistance programs. We have the Rehabilitation of High Hazard Potential Dam program and the FMAG program as well. We have the FEMA State Mitigation Planning and Policy Guide. So this was released last April, but it goes into effect April 19th of this year for any plans that will be approved on or after that date. So we will be abiding by the policies there. That was a big update. And I mentioned a little bit earlier, but really focuses on climate and equity quite a bit more, as well as a few other things that I'll go over in a moment. We also have the HMA program and policy guide, which the new version was just released last week, so very recently. So this supersedes the 2015 version of the HMA guide, which outlines all of the regulations and grant management that goes into the FEMA hazard mitigation assistance programs. So we want to make sure that while it doesn't have specific requirements for hazard mitigation plans, similar to how the mitigation or the state mitigation planning and policy guide does, but it does have policies and guidance for these grants that we want to make sure the actions and activities and projects in this plan are as eligible for as possible. So we will be using that to help guide the process, and Dewberry did work on the HMA program and policy guide, so we are intimately familiar with it. So that should go very smoothly. And then I also want to mention the state of Connecticut's executive orders, most notably the 21-3 that came out a couple years ago that lists some actions that we'll be going over in just a moment. And then we also have Public Act 21-115, an act concerning climate change adaptation that will help guide us as well, along with any other Connecticut plans, policies, and programs that the core planning team would like us to focus on. So this slide just goes a little bit more in depth into the new FEMA guidance on mitigation planning. So it's still a requirement to go through the whole planning process. So we have to go through stakeholder engagement, update the risk assessment, all of that, update the mitigation strategy. But on this slide, it does just call out some of the more notable pieces that are a bit newer. So there's a much bigger focus on changes in development. So this could be changes in hazard vulnerability, social vulnerability, changes in capabilities. It could be physical development, such as construction, land development, climate change, population changes, all of that. It also calls out the need to reflect changes in participating in the planning process. So really increasing the amount of stakeholders that are invited into the process and hopefully participate in the process. And also focuses on community lifelines, which is something that FEMA is bringing to the forefront, especially now, bringing climate change experts, agencies that support underserved communities, et cetera. And then also a bigger emphasis to go more in depth on describing program requirements. This would be in the capability assessment. So going in depth on building codes, land use, the NFIP program, state level, and dam programs, FMAG programs, and just requirements. We had to always provide an overview of those, but we just have to go a little bit more in depth now. And then we have the overview of Executive Order 21-3 that I mentioned earlier. So I won't go one by one through all of these actions, but I did want to bring this up because there are a lot of actions that could have some impacts on the hazard mitigation plan. And if we have some progress on them, we want to make sure that's integrated and reflected into the plan. So you'll see that there's a note on this slide, worksheet question 1. So for the folks in the room, you should have received a worksheet that was passed out. So I'll pause for a moment and give you some time to answer that question. But basically, it's just asking if you can provide any updates that your agency may have on addressing some of the actions in the executive order. And I want to note it's all of these actions, and there's one on the next, a couple on the next slide too. They're not required to be done to put into the hazard mitigation plan update. So there's not, an insane time limit that we're placing, but if there has been progress on these, we would like to incorporate that. So that's why we're asking about it. And then for the folks online, there should be a comment pinned to the top of the chat that has a link to a virtual version of the worksheet. So you can go ahead and click on that, and it will just be a form. So you can go ahead and answer question 1 if you have anything to share there. And then just go ahead and keep that window open because we'll go through a couple other questions as well. So I'll just pause for a couple minutes to let people respond.
Sign in when they walked in, children studying anything. I haven't signed in sheet. There's, I think there's a few, thank you. Yeah. Well, it's like
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, other should be other. Yeah. Everybody else. Like, there's nothing to talk about. But we know will be coming down the road.
And I did go ahead and move to the next slide, which is just showing additional actions that were pulled out here. And just want to note this, these are not all the actions that are in this executive order. These are just the ones that were most heavily related to the hazard mitigation planning process. There are other ones that can be related. So the ones that are mostly focused on sustainability are not included on this slide or the previous one, but there is a connection to this plan and sustainability. We can have actions and activities and projects in the plan that are related to that, such as microgrids, solar panels, things like that. And then also not reflected on here are the ones that are heavily focused on community health, but that there is still a connection there. We just ran out of space on some of the slides. And so there are opportunities to have actions that relate back to those as well. Improving tree coverage in our communities, as well as installing generators to make sure we don't lose power, and therefore climate control in facilities throughout the communities. So there are opportunities to integrate with those actions as well. But it's the ones most heavily related to like hazard risk reduction. All right, and then you'll notice on the worksheets, there are other questions there. Those will pop up the same little pencil with the worksheet. Item will pop up and we'll give you time to answer those questions as well. And then just a shameless plug to make my job easier, that if you are virtual and you haven't put your name and agency and office or division in the chat, please do that. It will help me immensely later. I very much appreciate it. And then I will pass it over to Scott.
Thank you. And for those on the phone, were you able to access the link in the online form without any problems? Just curious. Sounds going up. It's good. All right. Before we transition into talking about the risk assessment, are there any questions about the process. I know most of you have been through it before, but are there any questions about the process or any of the changes with the executive orders or the new guidance people have? Okay, hearing none. As Jade mentioned on one of the slides, the part where we started to go away and do work in the back room is the risk assessment. It's the hardest lift in the project, typically in terms of time. And it is not our purpose to update the data just for the sake of updating. It's kind of a continuous improvement process. And in order to do that, we're going to reach out to some of you at least looking for new data. And we're going to need that data in a pretty timely fashion this go around. We really have an abbreviated schedule. If we're going to make that deadline, which we really don't have an option, we need to make the deadline because public assistance is on the line. So we ask that you help us with that to the extent that you can, and we may reach out to some folks on the call separately from this meeting. If you can go to the next slide, please. So as Jade alluded already, the purpose of the risk assessment is kind of like, think about if you make an investment, you're going to do your homework before you make that investment to come to the determination that it's a sound one that's needed. And that's what the risk and vulnerability assessment do. They help inform the investment that we make in the mitigation strategies and actions and policies and programs that flow out of that portion of the plan. The steps are identifying and describing the hazards, identifying assets, assessing the risk of those assets, and assets could be buildings, infrastructure, people, property, operations, continuity, those types of things, and then summarizing that vulnerability. Next slide, please. So the components of the risk assessment, the hazard ranking, we'll stop and spend a few minutes on that slides, but the hazard ranking is where we identify the natural, in this plan is focused on natural hazards. I should have mentioned at the beginning. We identify the natural hazards that are a threat to the state. If that hazard has not changed, then we leave that alone and move forward with the update. But we rank those hazards on the level of importance that they have, or the level of our limited time and money and resources that we have to prioritize around. We do that in the ranking, and that kind of determines how we move forward through the risk assessment and where we spend the majority of the resources. Each hazard is profiled, and that profile includes a history, the extent of the hazard, the location for those that lend themselves, the spatial analysis, what's changed since last time, there have been other occurrences, what potential frequency of those events, either based on some type of modeling or based on historic events. Then we also we'll be also looking at the integration of local hazard mitigation plans into this. So we'll look at how the communities rank their hazards, how they did their analysis, and whether that data can inform the plan. And we'll be doing this on a kind of not generically for the entire state, but on a county by county basis. And then lastly, we will do a vulnerability analysis, which will produce actual loss estimates for certain scenarios where the data will lend itself to that, or a minimum exposure analysis to show us, like, now we know what's in harm's way, how frequently it may occur, here's what's at risk, and here's what might happen during different disaster scenarios. Also, this time we did some of it last time, but we'll be looking at the impacts of climate change and incorporating that into how those hazards are changing. So for each hazard, with the possible exception of earthquake, we'll have a section that talks about, what's happening in the world of climate science and how that is impacting that particular hazard. And the other notable thing, going forward into the mitigation strategy is typically in the past, we've been building a plan that focuses on what's in harm's way currently. This plan will begin the new process of also incorporating what will be in harm's way in the future and what actions we can take to potentially lessen the impacts to those things. Next slide. Some of the data we'll be using, the FEMA has a software called HAZUS. We use HAZUS for modeling damages to earthquake scenarios, inland flood, riverine flooding, coastal flooding, surge, and wind. A new version of that model was just recently released version 6.0. So that alone will provide some updates and changes to the states. I believe 6.0 has the 2020 census data in it for the first go around. So that'll be interesting. And that HAZUS model actually estimates losses based on a variety of different things depending on the hazard, using a building stock and inventory of infrastructure. We will be needing state-owned and operated facilities and critical facilities and assets to be refreshed. Talking to several of you offline, that has always been one of the challenges in the past when we've updated this plan, is getting that data set in a good, consistent condition across the state so that we can do consistent analysis with it. So we will be reaching out to OPM and others in the very near future to start figuring out what is the best available data on state-owned and operated facilities and assets. CIRCA has been working on this Resilient Connecticut program, and as part of phase 2 of that project, a climate change vulnerability index has been created based on a number of contributing factors, and it's a mapped product and a mapping tool. We will be incorporating that into the state plan for the first time, which really I think is going to be significant for Connecticut, because I know most states are not at that level where they have a statewide data set that looks at vulnerability at the small grid level. Out of that CCBI data, and John Krasinski can jump in. I mean, next time I pause if I'm getting any of this wrong. But out of that data, there are also identified zones of shared risk, which resulted in regional resilience opportunity areas. And those areas are 7 or 8 of them are targeted with programs right now where projects are being conceptually designed and studies are being done, benefit cost analysis, et cetera, to provide sort of some template projects for the heat hazard and flooding to move forward in these particular locations that came out of that study, and there'll be additional locations in the future. So we want to make sure all that good work is wrapped into this project and used to inform the plan. And I think that's going to be a significant contribution.
Got a thumbs up.
Yeah, that's hopefully
the other thing you're working on.
Hopefully it was John.
I believe we just had a presentation on an environmental justice mapping that they're doing, which is pretty interesting.
Yes, yeah, I believe we're going to talk about that a little bit here. Yes, actually on the slide, EPA has an environmental justice tool, but I know that CIRCA is doing something with that to customize it and the state. And when we get into open discussion, I'm going to ask John to jump in and talk a little bit about that. We'll be using social vulnerability data. We sort of default to the CDC social vulnerability index, but we're open to additional data. I know that CIRCA is also doing some work there. We're looking at the environmental justice, as George mentioned. And then there's some more standard sources of historic event data, like the National Climatological Environment. I always get this one wrong. I've been doing it for 5 years, and I still get it wrong. NCEI database. National Center for Environmental Information. The IPCC 6 assessment report that just recently came out will be used to inform the project as well as some of the other items listed on here. I won't touch on all of them. Next slide. So back to the questionnaire or the data collection sheet. I mentioned already that state-owned and operated critical facilities and assets are critical for us to do this analysis. That should also, it should say state-owned or operated and critical facilities and assets, because we really need all of that facility data. Then repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties data. We get from FEMA. That one, these two are highlighted in green because they're always the stumbling block. Then dam inundation zones, any hazard specific data that you can think of to assess risk from natural hazards. My screen's on hold, I'm not sure why. Any hazard history data that you have, public assistance damages that your agency has received since the last plan update in 2019. Any of that data, pictures, videos of hazards or damages since the last plan update. Any of that you have that you can put into that data collection form so that we'll know who to contact. Time comes would be appreciated. We'll just pause here, give you a few minutes to do that, but also take any questions that you might have. Any questions from the virtual folks? Excellent. And then on this slide is the ranking from the last plan done by county. Some of the items that went into that ranking were population vulnerability, building permits to reflect growth areas, development growth areas, probability of future events, previous property damages, deaths and injuries, the ranking that they received in local mitigation plans, the geographical extent of the hazard. So what part of the county or community would it potentially damage if it happened? A hazard concern ranking from a survey that we did, and then an analysis of how many critical facilities are impacted by that particular hazard. So those are the things that went into sort of the ranking algorithm. You can see where the hazards fell out. We are thinking that in this plan update, the one thing that is missing that wasn't included last time is probably extreme heat and extreme cold. So I wanted to throw that out there and see if we can get consensus on that. And then I wanted to open it up and see if there's any, any other natural hazards that we think shouldn't be on the list perhaps anymore, or additional ones that we think should be, or just anecdotally, if you think any of these are getting worse as a result of climate change, we can have a discussion around that as well. One question was, would the plan have inundation zones for privately owned dams? If there were high hazard dams and we had that data, we could do an analysis with it. And I don't think we would probably include images or pictures of that, but if we're doing an aggregate analysis in the plan, we certainly could do that if we had that data available to us.
Just a question on ranking a dam failure as a natural hazard. Is that a consequence of another natural hazard, like a high rainfall or something? Is there, because there are other consequences to high rainfall events other than dam failures. Is that maybe a better characterization than a consequence?
Yeah, it's actually in most guidance is not really listed as a natural hazard. That's probably the one exception that we have on the list. because it's so closely related to flooding, we include it just because we want to know what the impacts would be. But it really is a kind of a technological or human cause hazard more than a natural one. So yeah,
Do you break out flooding into like various sources because it may have a completely different solution than, and you may have areas that have compound flooding issues.
Yeah.
And then, with, as climate changes, you have more frequency of these highly localized extreme heavy rain bombs that, hard to plan for.
Yeah, we do break it down by inland riverine flooding, coastal flooding, sea level rise flooding, storm surge flooding. Those combined flood areas is sort of a little too granular for us to be able to get it at the state level. Okay. But we are also giving a lot more emphasis at everywhere that we do the plans, particularly on the East Coast, on pluvial flooding, or stormwater drainage flooding from these high intensity, short duration rainfall events that are increasing with climate change. The tricky part with that is it's becoming the most common type of flooding. It's the one that isn't well mapped or mapped at all. So we're, outside of mitigation planning, we're actually doing a whole bunch of that because people are starting to panic and realize that they need that type of mapping. So I think FEMA wants to eventually take its program in that direction, but whether they'll be able to do that in a way that's granular enough remains to be seen. Any other thoughts on the ranking, other than I think it seems like the consensus is we should add extreme heat.
Do you do, since you had grid vulnerabilities and we just had recently got geomagnetic storms, do you do anything related to that, or is that outside the scope of this?
We have not in the past. We don't have a conversation about it, I think.
Sorry, I got dragged up in the deputy commissioner.
That's all right.
Can't say no. There are two things we would like to add to this, if it's doable from your side.
Yeah.
Extreme heat and also solar storms. I know that there's a nice report that Lloyd's of London did.
Thank you for repeating.
What? Oh, I'm sorry. You guys already mentioned that. Okay. All right. I know Lloyd's, you may have mentioned it, Lloyd's of London did an excellent report on solar storm impact on the Northeast power grid.
Did not do that. I know we had some impacts from the last one last week. So some pretty big swings. So
Yeah. So it can cause, did you guys see actual voltage swings within the network? Okay.
We did.
Okay. So, and those were not, they were strong to extreme, but that NOAA scale ends at extreme, and there's so much more extreme going out to the Kerrigan event and things like that are much more, 100 times more impactful. So yes. And
the other thing is, the whole Texas issue with the ice storm that they had down there and the impact on the solar power grid.
Yeah.
And I was just at a reinsurance association conference 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about one of the key things there that really exacerbated the problem was people went out when the power went out, or as power was fluctuating, they're having issues. They were going out and buying heaters and stuff and plugging those in, which were drawing down, more power, which exacerbated their problem. So
yeah,
very interesting, case study there.
Yeah, we'd have to brainstorm ways to do the actual risk and vulnerability assessment for that. I mean, we know qualitatively what the threat is, but trying to quantify it.
Yeah, if you look at the Lloyd's report, they actually do quantify it by a transformer type in Connecticut. So they talk about what equipment is out there in the field and how vulnerable these single phase versus multi-phase transformers are to the variations in electrically induced currents. So it's a very detailed report. So
Scott, you have a question?
Rankins, hi, it's Francesca online. Do you have anything that kind of weights kind of not only just the hazard, the physical hazard, but also looking at the impact of that hazard? And what I mean by that is like poverty rates for different counties, because that's a good metric for resiliency. Because as we plan for hazard mitigation, I would think that in our state level plans, we should consider where resources may be needed more versus less. in terms of response?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It might be coming up later, but.
Yeah, no, and we've mentioned it a few times, but we haven't gone into any depth on it. The past plans have not addressed social vulnerability. Will, so it is going to be a major part of the equation when we're quantifying risk from these hazards, for all hazards. It is also a major component, at least of all of FEMA's grant programs now, if not all federal grant programs. So it will be a major add-on to the part of the plan that looks at, what and who is at risk, and it will serve to help inform the prioritization of projects. Any other thoughts on this? Move on. This presentation will be posted and by the way, are distributed somehow. So this won't be your last opportunity to have input on that. It's just one of a few. I mentioned before local hazard mitigation plan incorporation. So one of our other sub-consultants who has been involved in writing many of those plans, as have Jamie and myself, we'll be doing a run through of all of the local plans, most of which are done at the COG level, and looking at hazard identification terminology used in those plans, how the vulnerability and risk assessment methodologies and the results in those plans to see how well it dovetails with or informs our ranking and methodologies, and then the types of mitigation actions that are identified in those plans. Also be looking at capability assessments. If there's anything notable, consistent at the local level that would inform the state capability assessment, looking at that too. And then also taking the loss estimation that was done at the local level, seeing how well that coincides with the loss estimation we do, and rolling that into the plan. We're providing ours to be used with subsequent updates of the local or regional plans. And then lastly, if there's patterns of the actions that are in the state or in the local plans that need support from the state or a particular state agency, we'll develop actions around those identified needs. Excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna have Jamie come up and get us started on this next piece.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Told me not to touch this computer. Okay, so next slide. Great, so this is going to be questions on the back side of your questionnaire that we're going to look at. And the first one, which asks about what you like or don't like in the current plan, I wanted to kind of take a step backwards before we get there and say, have you looked at that plan in the last 5 years? Have any of you used that plan in any way? Are you familiar with it? Anybody looked into it? If you've looked at it, that's credit. Okay.
I wrote the original one back in 1990.
Big credit.
Although that was about this back.
Yeah. I know, they get bigger and bigger. So, yeah, I think it says something if people haven't looked at it. And I think that's something to kind of consider as we think about if it's useful to you and what you like or don't like. You may not know if you haven't used it at all. But that being said, does anybody want to have a comment about what they do like or don't like about the current plan?
It's 1,500 pages.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's, yeah.
No one's gonna.
Yeah, you could prop up a toddler, right? Like, it's big.
Don't like. When I retire, I might take it home.
Yeah.
Use it as a doorstop?
Yeah. Yeah.
There needs to be a way to have like a condensed version that people can read through. Then if they need to go to more detail, they could go into the other well, I would say other 1,200 or 1,300 pages for more detail, but there really needs to be a part, because that's what's, you look at it, no one's gonna pick up a 1,500-page document.
No.
You picked it up and almost had a back problem.
I think sometimes it's important to know how a plan like this can be used.
Right.
And that, that can inform how to structure it in a way that makes it usable to the people who need to be able to use it.
Right. And I
And
can
the
tell
ones
you,
that don't know that they should be able to use it.
yeah, as someone who's been writing these plans for a long time as well. 20 years, maybe? No, we don't want to date ourselves, but yes, a long time. I think that as someone who writes the plan, we're writing them to meet FEMA requirements in a lot of ways. And so that kind of pushes us in one direction. But I think there's been, in the last 5 years or so, a big backlash to that and more emphasis on making them user friendly and putting them, more of the content online and less on, printing these gigantic documents that are just. Okay, so, yeah.
So Sarah actually asked me a question a while ago about projects, let's say, just for the sake of the conversation, state projects. Jim, is it a good idea? I know we've talked about this in the past about adding in matrices that have localized projects and shovel-ready kind of stuff that
Right.
may be able to, we may be able to submit under any of the HMA grants or something like that. Is that something you may want to look at too from the state side? Having some sort of shovel-ready project list of things that are ready to go.
Yeah, personally, that sounds like a good idea to me. I mean, people always ask, like, why should we prioritize the project? So does that list matter? Well, it matters because if it's post-disaster and you need to act quickly, then you have a handful of projects that you can work on,
I thought someone was working on, I don't know if Circa was, but I thought there was, because we've had this conversation before about having projects categorized about, so you have stuff teed up and ready to go when there's funding available.
A lot of times right now, like bipartisan infrastructure law, we're getting comments down from federal agencies that say, we're going to give you money. Do you have projects for this? And it's like, now everybody's coming to me for a deep plan of resilience plans. Can I pull that out of there? Can I pull that out of there? And it's like, that's a great way to do it. But if we can start taking what maybe is in other, start collecting all of that, is that a useful way to use the state level plan as opposed to having it going into the regional plans?
Yeah, I think so.
I know I've had conversations with Rebecca Finch about this.
Yeah.
Garcia, just, I thought there was something was being done because people recognize it's a huge vulnerability. It's a gap that has to be addressed.
And I'm seeing state level, smaller level plans actually using planning process to begin identifying the projects, almost to the point where they have draft applications in it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's something that would work at the state level.
I think something too to think about is as we begin putting together these projects, you want to make sure that we're capturing the content of where else these projects are prioritized in what other plans, because the mitigation plan will be useful to you in the sense that it's this resource for then getting grants, but you want to say, yeah, this project has been identified in X, Y, and Z plan, not just the mitigation plan. So I think if we can make those links, and then down the road, hopefully you see those links somehow online and how all of this content is presented to you, it'll be more useful.
Another thing that would be useful in the plan is to let people know what kind of permitting process is required for different types of projects. We've run into this recently. North Branford had a major EOC renovation while they're building a new one, public safety complex down there. And they found out almost after the fact that they needed to go through EHP because they were using federal funding for part of that project. So that created a delay in the project, and they eventually got through it, but it was a lot of work. So something along the lines of, if you're thinking of doing construction where you're breaking ground for a new facility, these are the permitting processes at the federal level that you're going to have to go through. Something along those lines to let them know that, there's more work than meets the eye with some of these projects. And it would also help state rank the projects. Obviously, a project that looks great like Harbor Brook in Meriden might not look so good if you're using federal funding because of all the wetlands permitting and all the, land use permitting and EHP that you would have to go through. I know that they're going through a bit of a headache down there. So just something along those lines, maybe a column or two to add to project types.
That's a good point.
We do rank the projects using that staple lead approach.
Oh, you do? Okay.
We do consider environmental, i.e. permitting issues, but kind of quickly, and like we don't document it in the plan. So these are permits.
Maybe documenting it would be a great idea for an applicant to look at it and say, oh, we need a state historic preservation officer to have input or approval on this particular type of project. So,
right. I also think what you're seeing is people are submitting projects or participating in the planning process that are not emergency management folks, so they're not accustomed to our process. And I think we need to have some education as they begin to participate, like from public health or something like that. You want their projects in this plan, but they have to understand how it fits in. All right. So obviously we've made lots of changes and hopefully those changes will lead to you being able to use the plan more. Let's talk just quickly about priorities, what current priorities you have and what you think, how are they different than what they may have been 5 years ago? I'm sorry, did I miss something?
No, it looks like somebody has their hand raised.
Hi, folks. Joanna Wozniak Brown. I just wanted to follow up on the discussion about the Resilience Project pipeline. I know we've had this discussion over different groups and iterations over the years, and Executive Order 21.3 mentioned it, but didn't set out a process for creating it. And I was talking to the folks at OPM about how we would create that. And so I'm hoping this summer to scope that out so we can get to something that's easy for everybody to access. It incorporates a process that everybody has had input on. We're including information from the right plans, and then maybe creating a prioritization process for those types of projects. So I'm hoping that'll be the summer project, and looping in Rebecca French when she gets back from maternity leave. And then the other thing I was hoping that might be considered is, I know the HMPs are 5-year outlook, but considering the capital outlay that we have on critical facilities or state assets, I'm hoping we can include things that are, 2050 and beyond that require us to do things now. So I'm not quite sure what the best practice is for that, but that'd be exciting. And then including other information from other state plans, like the Long Range Transportation Plan and Transportation Improvement Plans from the state and from the COGS. I think that those are important to include for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. Thank you.
One hazard we've seen recently with Ida was excessive rainfall events in urban areas.
Yeah.
I think that is becoming a much bigger risk, especially in the northeastern United States as the climate warms. Each degree Celsius you increase air temperature increases the amount of moisture that air can hold by 7%. So that's a significant change. So I think, we saw a lot of destruction during Ida due to the emergency flooding that occurred. And I think we're going to see more of that in the future. So, maybe an urban focus on flash flooding.
Good, that makes sense. I think too, with temperature extreme changes, you're seeing the roads disintegrate faster. That's something else that we.
And also the culvert infrastructure in Connecticut is mainly designed, the older ones are designed for 5 or 10-year return frequencies. Those storms have now become 15 to 25-year return frequencies on average. So they're overwhelming the existing system.
Okay, so that's certainly something we can add in as current priorities are shifting that we're looking at. What else? Are there priorities that you think you're working on in your departments? Or your organizations that you think need to show up in this plan? I think we named a few today, just climate change, social vulnerability. We've also had some hazard shift. Are there other things? All right, well, you have time to add it to your form. I think we know what we can do to make the plan more useful. Is there any information in there that quickly shows up to you as being out of date or not necessary or useful? That might be hard to answer if you have never looked at the plan. Just fair.
There was one question in the comments that talked about how a database of the projects would be helpful, or a geospatial database. we're going to be doing, we're going to be creating a project dashboard this time that will have all of the projects laid out and have different ways to illustrate progress and to be an actually usable tool when the Interagency Hazard Mitigation Committee or this group meets throughout the course of the 5 years to better display that progress and have like a one-stop shop to go to see it at least. And I think it would probably be pretty easy to add a spatial component to that. So we do have some plans to address that kind of.
Yeah, so in the process, you have this plan in 2019, you identified some projects, things to work, and then we've had a whole bunch of hazard events in the meantime. Is there a way to look at those and say, yeah, we didn't see this one coming, or we missed the ranking and this project was not selected, but it could have helped here? Is there some way that we learned from what we saw as the real hazards of this current of the last 5 years and see how that can maybe change our process with this plan?
Yeah, so 2 things with that. Yes, the risk assessment that Scott talked about will look backwards and say what's happened in the last 5 years as part of an update. It also will look forward, which is the best and change that is happening in terms of how we do mitigation planning is we're not only looking backwards. We are looking at, what is the built environment going to look like? What's the population going to look like in the future, as well as, what will happen with climate change. The other thing is part of implementing your hazard mitigation plan is that, on a regular basis, you get together as a group and review your plan, but you should also look at your plan post-disaster. So after any disaster, you're going to look at it and say, okay, yes, our priorities have now shifted due to this experience that we just had, or we need to add a new mitigation action. It's obviously whatever happens could make a big change to your priorities. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's just wonder how.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me, are there plans, programs, funding opportunities that you're aware of that we integrate? And I'm sure there are a number, so I want to make sure you get those jotted down. Okay. We are under a pretty expedited timeline to develop this plan. So as you participate in these meetings, if something comes to mind, don't hesitate. Like tomorrow you think of something, you need to send it in. And there's going to be a link for even new actions, so you can add them anytime. Don't wait, because that will be a little out of luck. All right, next slide. Thank you for doing that. So all the mitigation plans include goal statements, and you're going to see yours in a minute. The previous plan has 3 goal statements, and they're really general vision statements of how you want to use the plan, what will happen if the plan's implemented. They're long-term vision statements. And the previous plans included floodplain management. Also included was implementing cost-effective mitigation actions, and then an increase in research and planning. And obviously a lot of that has happened. Moving forward, obviously we need to add these executive orders and other state priorities, as well as meet the new FEMA obligations. And so looking forward, our thought is there should be 4 goal statements or categories, if you will, not just 3. Moving those first 3 forward and adding one that relates to looking forward with policy and planning. Obviously, looking forward, you want to include climate change, you want to include social vulnerability. And when you think about mitigation planning, those policies that you develop, those are your most cost-effective ways of mitigating risk, right? How you use land, deciding how you're going to do it, it certainly makes the most sense. So any feedback or thoughts on this? We're not going to wordsmith it today, but just wanted to get your sense of it.
Those are the general categories that we find that most of the projects and actions fall into. So it's also just from an organizational standpoint, it seems to make sense to have the goals match the buckets, if you will.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad to see public awareness and education. And that also, that should also be kind of translated into professional awareness.
Yes.
Because, you know, you're talking about the emergency managers. I come from the planners world, and it's like I'm new to Connecticut, and the state where I was just at, it's banging on the door for the emergency managers, hey, can we please talk?
Right.
And nobody was answering.
Well, right, and some first responders are just waiting for that bell to go off. And what we're talking about is we gotta get out there now, don't wait for that. All right, so let's go to the next slide, the last one before we start talking about the breakout groups. So as we think about updating the plan and think about what you want to do moving forward in the next 5 years, we certainly want you to keep integrating other state plans and studies into this plan, and whatever comes out of this plan, as you go ahead and do another planning process, you want to take these concepts and move them forward, right? These aren't they shouldn't stay in the well of these documents. We want the mitigation plan to align with all of them. We talked a little bit about, Scott mentioned Stapley as a way to prioritize the mitigation actions. And basically it's a little bit of a benefit cost analysis with your priorities thrown in there. So you see putting in climate projections, social vulnerability, community lifelines, and future development. One thing that I wanted to get just a question about is, I think the previous plan prioritized the project sort of from 1 to 50 or whatever, didn't matter what organization that they were in. And something to consider is, I worked on the Massachusetts plan from 2018, and we had each organization develop a priority order within their organization because they felt very strongly that the organization's priorities didn't pit against each other in any way. So I thought it was something that we should all think about. There's no right or wrong answer, but I just wanted to mention it to you folks as something to kind of consider. So somebody's priorities don't end up on the bottom. And in fact, when you're going to implement projects, that where they fall into that system, it doesn't make any difference, right? Whoever gets the funding and the impetus to do the project will do it. So just something to think about. Then the next thing is just to really encourage you to start thinking about what you want to see in the plan. And I can't say it enough, the plan should represent your priorities. Okay, so the goals, the projects that you have in mind need to show up in this plan. Am I missing something?
No, George was just commenting on the
Joanna's amendment.
Oh, I didn't get
It's about, you know, looking forward and what would the 38 Express do to us today? And I told Ken, I said, I hope I'm retired.
You're out before this happens.
That's what keeps me up at night. To be the insurance guy in the room and just having gone through Sandy and Irene and that will be our worst headache. But yeah, that will just be a nightmare.
Yeah, and to elaborate on that, we do that. We model certain scenarios for hurricane wind, and that has the software. So I believe we actually do show today's numbers for that event to happen again. But the numbers are so humongous that they almost don't like they're not even relatable because they're so big.
Yeah.
All right.
I've gone down to the hazardous training and just for, you know, giggles with Ron. I say, what does it look like under 38? Yeah.
Don't pull back the curtain, right? Okay, other comments? You're gonna talk about the breakout group?
Yeah, unless there's any other comments.
I just have a quick question. Have the flood maps changed in the West?
I don't know for sure. They used to be very important in that. They don't all change at once. They change on the cycle. I think most of them had updates in the last 10 years or so. I'm not sure what's happening in the last 4 or 5. We will find that out and include that in the plan. I don't know.
All right, so we are running a tad bit over time, so I know this says 10 minutes, but I hope people wouldn't be upset if I change that to 6 minutes. So we could get back here at 2:30, both in person and virtual. So everybody can take a little break for now, and then we'll come back at 2:30 and talk about some breakout rooms.
Yeah, teacher answers.
A lot of openings.
Oh, no. We got 5 to go here, and that's gonna be it. I'm out the door at 6:04.
Yeah, 500.
So we're gonna meet in person. Yeah, it's fast. I was like,
Yeah, it's what
that's why I always said geology. I said,
30%.
Yeah.
20%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the eastern part of the state will be literally. You got the rain that she's got this. The western part of the state. Assembly.
I feel like my understanding
2 years.
that would be taller years. It's
And Harvey and Florence were high school. Worst case, now we've got like virtual stuff and people can't come.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was just talking about the yesterday about how one of our limitations.
They have people on it from.
Yeah, I just want to, because I think.
All the crowds are on. So that's, yeah, we got John Paul Cass, he's on your books. Yes, yeah. Like everyone. But I got it. And then I said, oh, I know. Yes.
You got kids, boy. Tell that kid to go get Call me when you get that money. No, but I'm very much in favor of alternative resources, especially since there's so much more. You know, but you gotta have a way to store that. Yeah, exactly. So.
Some of those.
They do it for instance.
All right, everybody, we're getting ready to back together.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We were gonna do an exercise where we broke out into rooms and then broke out into separate rooms on the computer. But it was designed for an hour, and because we don't have we no longer have that hour, we think by the time we get organized, we're just gonna barely get started and have to stop. So we're gonna do something a little bit differently, and Jada's gonna explain.
And I'm sorry for everyone in the room, but just to help the people online, I'm gonna have to like do something on my laptop, so I'll still be talking, but I might not be able to make eye contact, so apologies. Okay.
We can watch it there.
Yeah. So I think what we're gonna do instead, basically these breakout groups, we're going to be helping us get some status updates on the projects and actions and the mitigation strategy from the last plan. But due to the time constraints, as Scott said, I think we're just going to give you an overview of the type of information we're going to be looking for. And so for those virtual, we don't have the handouts to give you, but I'm going to show you what it looks like online, and then we'll be able to get some links out so that you guys will have the opportunity to look over the actions that may be related to your agency to the last plan, reach out to others within your division and try and get the status updates as needed. I think that'll be probably easier anyways. I'm putting everybody on the spot right now. And then for the folks in the room, you're getting some handouts with some actions related or assigned to your agency from the last plan.
So that's your.
So I will go ahead and share it.
No, you're gonna get another share.
What I'm handing out is by agency. It's yeah. So the one I just handed out was just to deep people. Anybody from didn't get one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna do everybody else.
20 years now. Scott.
All right, so everyone in the room will have more tailored versions, but for the folks online, I'm just gonna go over just so you can see the types of information that we're gonna be looking for. So this is just an online table essentially that has all of the activities, projects and actions from the 2019 plan in this main column here. And it has them organized by agency and department, just to make sorting them a little bit easier. These actions are all available and easy to access in the 2019 plan too. Maybe don't put too much emphasis on the easy to access because this a 1,500 page document, but they are in there in the mitigation strategy table. But what we're going to do is we will send out a link, not today, but sometime soon to everyone with the actions and the ones assigned to your agency. And what we're going to be asking for is just a status update. So are they, has it not been started? Is it in progress? Is this something that is ongoing on like an annual basis? Has it already been completed? Is it no longer relevant and you would just like to cancel it and delete it and not include it in the next plan? So we'll provide more instructions on that. But just wanted to give you a brief overview now on what you can expect. And also there'll be an opportunity to provide some feedback on if there's other partners that you would like to add to accomplish these actions. If it is something you would like to carry over into the new plan, you can change the language of the actions if you want. You can reprioritize them. So there'll be some opportunities and some instructions for how to edit and provide feedback and an overall status update on these. And of course, we will have the opportunity as well for folks to suggest entirely new actions and projects. So what I'll do for the time being is I'll drop the link for this suggest a mitigation activity form in the chat. No pressure to do it now, but if you have an action that you just can't wait to share, feel free to fill out this form. And there's only two required things, the actual text of the action as well as the priority. And then there's some extra stuff if you would like to add extra information as well, feel free to do that. But I will drop this link in the chat for anyone who would like to share. And then we will be sure to follow up with a way to provide status updates for any of the actions that may be relevant to your agency at a later date. Okay, so we have the new mitigation actions form in the chat. If anybody has anything they'd like to share now, there'll be more opportunities to do that later. So no immediate pressure there. Anything else you want to add or shoot?
I'll just add that I've said it a bunch of times about the time frame on this one. So if you don't do your homework and get it back to us, we will have to be pestering you. So if you can get, the more you can get done now and get back to us, you can use these forms online. You can do it by hand and scan it to us if you want. However you want us to do it, whatever is easiest. But you could, as soon as we get those action dispositions out of the way, the next go around will be, at the next meeting, we'll be talking more about the new ones based on the results of the risk assessment. So just to kind of plea for help on the timing there. And then last couple of slides remaining that are really just next steps. And so here we have, sorry. Well, we have some people on this call are saying, and the team just saying the same thing. So we're just trying to get the people online on the same page. All right, so here's the schedule that I'm talking about. We are at the kickoff meeting. It is March. Then the next, actually, if you can you move that bar across the top, it's blocking the months. So okay, so the here we are at the kickoff meeting. The risk assessment, which is the heavy lift, needs to be done in the May, June timeframe. And that's the one where we'll need the data from you. So simultaneous to that, we'll need the input on the disposition of these mitigation strategies from 2019. And then probably the next time we'll come back together will be in the June, probably end of June, early July timeframe. At that meeting, we'll have the risk assessment and the vulnerability assessment done for your review. After you review it, we're going to pass it and incorporate your comments. We're going to pass it along to the reviewers so that they can get a jump start on that when we're completing the rest of the plan. At that workshop in June or July, that will be a partial day workshop where we will actually present all the details of the risk assessment, but then have some working group sessions to develop the strategies for the next for the new plan. So that one will be, attendance at that one will be critical. In between these things, we'll be having meetings with other stakeholders to get their contributions as well. But you can see, I won't go through the details of the schedule. The strategy development has to be done by the end of July. Public engagement a little bit in August, and a submittal for your review prior to a FEMA review in the August-September timeframe. So it seems like a lot of time, but having done this, as Jamie has also for 20 years, I'm telling you, this is a challenging schedule, and we will definitely need support with the data as we go forward, and things as simple as this exercise we're going to do today. I know I'm preaching over and over again, but this is good. It's real on a critical path, and not just mitigation, but public assistance is at stake. So anything you can do to help, we appreciate it. And then if you can go to the next slide. And the next meeting, again, there's some links on this slide and some QR codes to share data, plans, and reports. So anything that you want included, the capability assessment, or think that we should be incorporating by reference or be generally aware of to inform this plan, can be transferred to us over that link. And then submitting any mitigation activity project ideas to include in the next plan. Get a jump start on that can be done with this link. Again, I already talked about what we'll be doing at the next meeting, which will be sometime in late June or early July. Are there any questions or comments on that?
Can you give us an idea of when, like, I like deadlines, I like numbers put on my calendar, take dates, because otherwise it's not on the calendar, it doesn't happen. Is there a way that you can like give us an idea of like when you want, like, drop dead, submit mitigation activity ideas and sort of, you know, finish this off for you? It's like, this is stuff that I need to go back and research for you, but I won't have time to do that. But
Thank you. Actually, thank you for asking that question, because like you, if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. So I'm up here preaching to you, and I probably wouldn't leave this meeting and not do it if I didn't have a deadline. So that's a really good point. Jade, what do you think is reasonable?
do you have any opinion?
Well, yeah, I would say, I mean, yeah, but I would say the old actions, that status, I would give yourselves 2 weeks.
Okay.
Because we can't do anything without that. Like, we can't develop the new ones. And some of the old ones, you know, you will be partially done or whatever. We might combine them into a new action. But we want to put as much time and energy into developing those new actions as possible. So hunt down this information.
Okay.
Make that your #1 priority.
When you send out that email with the resources in it, say exactly that in there. Yes. Because like knowing that if we don't have this in there, you can't move forward. It's really important to know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and also you'll find probably when you go through it, especially with that deep and Davis, where there's a lot more action, it's like, you may be like, what the heck is this? And not have any idea who put it in there, why it's in there. That person might have retired. So it's not as simple as just filling out the form. It's got to track down.
That's what I mean. Like, I can't do this until I go talk to people.
Right. So yeah, if we can do the old action disposition in 2 weeks, we'll remind you with an email. And then for the new ones, we probably don't have to set a deadline for that.
Yeah, I would say just like general, like start brainstorming now, and we'll have a workshop, meeting to discuss that in further detail. But if there are existing plans that have actions and projects in them that you would like integrated into this plan, sending those to us as soon as possible. So, like in 2 weeks would be fantastic, just so we can do some prep work and make sure that those are ready to go and be discussed during the upcoming workshop.
You'll have ideas as you review these old ones. You're gonna have ideas for the new ones. So just click that link and fill out those ideas. Sorry.
Yes, and I'll send an email out with reiterating that information. I'll share these links that are on the screen. And I just want to add, most people should be able to access the link on the left of the screen, the one about data, plans, and reports. If for some reason you don't have access, after this meeting, I'm going to be going and making sure all the attendees, just double checking that they have access. So maybe just give me like 30 minutes or so after this meeting if the link isn't working for you. And that should be good to go after that.
Hand raised.
So any, just quickly, and yeah, join that, hand raised, but so any future requests for data or information, just tag them with a a drop dead date.
Yes, yeah. We'll do that then. Sure. Johanna, online, you had a question?
Thanks. I think I missed this, but are you sending out that spreadsheet for the agencies to be updating the actions?
Yes.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'll have that sent out sometime in the next couple days. Is what I can promise, and I'll make sure that I include the deadline and the reasons why it's important to motivate everyone to get that information in.
Thanks. And the other thing I wanted to ask or mention was that you had mentioned how critical the information about state assets and operations is to this venture, and we have improved our. Unfortunately, it's at the moment only an Excel spreadsheet of those types of facilities, but we had mentioned in the scope of work that we sent yesterday for the expansion of the climate vulnerability of the other state assets about digitizing that. So if you just want to follow up with me about what's the best format we can get us closer to what you need or what we can send you to help with that.
Yeah, we've had a couple of offline conversations in the room today. We'll set up a meeting for later in the week or early next week. Try to dig into that and figure out what we need to do. Thanks. Any other? We're pretty much done. Are there any other questions or discussion items? Appreciate everybody coming out, especially those who came. Welcome. This was a little bit experimental for us doing the hybrid. I think for the most part it worked pretty well. It was got a little bulky at times, but I think it mostly worked. So appreciate that participating in our experiment. You can, I'm gonna leave some cards. Jade's email is on the slide. We'll distribute copies of the sign sheet, I think, to everybody, so everybody's got everybody else's email address, and please reach out with questions or data